Maya Thompson wasn't looking for love that rainy Tuesday morning. As she hurried into Sweet Bean Coffee Shop to escape the downpour, her only goal was to get her usual vanilla latte before heading to her shift at Atlanta General Hospital. Her dark curls were slightly damp despite the umbrella, and her scrubs were already wrinkled from the humidity. But that's when fate had other plans. The coffee shop was unusually crowded due to the weather, with every table occupied except one. As Maya waited in line, she noticed a man in a wheelchair working on a laptop at that table. He had kind eyes and a focused expression as his fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard. When it was finally her turn to order, Maya was disappointed to learn that the coffee machine was acting up. "It'll be about a 15-minute wait," the barista apologized. Maya sighed, looking around at the packed cafe. Where would she even wait? "You're welcome to share my table," a warm voice called out. It was the man in the wheelchair. "I'm James Wilson, and I promise I don't bite," he added with a gentle smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. Maya hesitated for a moment before walking over. "Thank you, that's very kind. I'm Maya Thompson," she replied, settling into the empty chair. She noticed how his workspace was perfectly organized, with a sleek laptop and a stack of coding books neatly arranged. "Let me guess. Healthcare?" James asked, gesturing to her scrubs. Maya nodded. "Nurse practitioner at Atlanta General. What about you?" "Web developer," James answered, turning his laptop slightly so she could see the complex lines of code on his screen. "I'm working on a website for a local children's charity. It needs to be extra accessible for kids with different abilities." There was something in the way he said it that caught Maya's attention. No pity in his voice, just determination and purpose. She found herself drawn into a conversation about his work, surprised by how easily they connected. "The accident was 5 years ago," James explained when she carefully asked about his wheelchair. "Drunk driver. But it led me to find my true calling in accessible web design, so I tried to see the silver lining." Maya was struck by his positivity. In her years of nursing, she'd seen many patients struggle with similar circumstances, but James's spirit was different. He spoke about his challenges matter-of-factly, without bitterness. Their conversation flowed naturally, touching on everything from their favorite books to their families. Maya learned that James was the middle child of three, raised by a single father who owned a small bookstore. She shared stories about her close-knit family, including her protective mother and two younger sisters. "Your coffee, ma'am," the barista called out, breaking their conversation bubble. Maya was surprised to realize 30 minutes had passed. "I should get going," she said reluctantly, gathering her things. "My shift starts soon." "Maya," James called as she stood up. "I know this might be forward, but would you like to have dinner sometime? There's this great Ethiopian restaurant nearby that makes amazing gingerbread." Maya felt her heart skip a beat. Dating hadn't been on her radar lately, especially after her last relationship ended badly. But there was something about James that felt different, genuine, warm, and real. "I'd like that," she found herself saying, surprising even herself. They exchanged numbers, and as Maya walked to work in the now clearing rain, she couldn't help but smile. That evening, as Maya finished her shift, she received a text from James. "Thank you for making a rainy day brighter." She held her phone close, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. Something told her this was the beginning of something special, something that would change both their lives in ways neither of them could imagine. Little did Maya know that this chance meeting at Sweet Bean Coffee Shop would lead her down a path filled with love, challenges, and the biggest surprise of her life. But for now, she was simply looking forward to dinner with the intriguing man who had turned a mundane coffee stop into something extraordinary. The Ethiopian restaurant was buzzing with life when Maya arrived for their first date. She spotted James already waiting at a corner table, wearing a crisp blue shirt that brought out the warmth in his brown eyes. He had chosen a spot where his wheelchair wouldn't block the walkway, always thinking of others' comfort. "You look beautiful," James said sincerely as Maya sat down, admiring her simple red dress. His genuine compliment made her cheeks warm. The evening flowed naturally as they shared a large platter of gingerbread with various colorful stews. James taught Maya the proper way to eat with her right hand, both of them laughing as she occasionally dropped bits of food. Their conversation deepened, touching on their hopes, dreams, and fears. But reality had its way of creeping in. Maya noticed the subtle stares from other diners, the whispered conversations, and the mixed looks of curiosity and judgment at seeing a black woman on a date with a disabled white man. James caught her noticing. "Does it bother you?" he asked quietly, gesturing vaguely at the onlookers. Maya straightened her spine. "People's ignorance is their problem, not ours," she replied firmly, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. The smile he gave her in return could have lit up the whole restaurant. Their relationship bloomed over the next few weeks. James showed Maya his world of web development, teaching her basic coding during lunch breaks at her hospital. Maya introduced him to her favorite jazz clubs, delighting in how he could name every instrument in the band just by listening. But their growing connection faced its first real test when Maya invited James to her family's Sunday dinner. Her mother, Gloria Thompson, was a strong-willed woman who had raised 3 daughters alone after their father passed away. She had definite ideas about what was best for her children. "Maya, baby." Gloria pulled her aside in the kitchen before James arrived. "Are you sure about this? Life is already hard enough for a black woman in this world. Why make it harder?" "Mama, please give him a chance," Maya pleaded. "He's different from anyone I've ever met." The doorbell rang before Gloria could respond. Maya's younger sisters, Tasha and Keisha, had already opened the door to welcome James. He rolled in smoothly, a homemade apple pie balanced carefully on his lap, a recipe he'd learned from his grandmother. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife, but James didn't let it faze him. He complimented Gloria's home, asked Tasha about her college applications, and discussed basketball stats with Keisha. By the time they sat down to eat, his natural charm had begun to work its magic. The turning point came during dessert. As they enjoyed James's pie, Gloria mentioned her arthritis was acting up, making it hard to update her church's website, which she managed. "I could help with that," James offered. "I'm actually working on making websites more accessible for people with different abilities. Maybe we could look at some solutions together." Maya watched as her mother's expression softened. It wasn't acceptance yet, but it was a start. Later that night, as James was leaving, Gloria pulled Maya aside again. "He's not what I expected," she admitted. "Just be careful, baby. The world isn't always kind to people who are different." "I know, Mama," Maya replied, watching James navigate his wheelchair down the ramp they temporarily installed. "But maybe we can help change that world, one day at a time." The following week, James kept his promise. He spent an afternoon with Gloria, making her church website easier to manage and teaching her simple tricks to work around her arthritis. Maya watched them work together, her heart swelling with emotion. That evening, as they sat in James' apartment watching the sunset through his window, Maya realized something had shifted. The barriers they faced hadn't disappeared, but they felt less insurmountable. Together, they were proving that love could bridge any gap, overcome any obstacle. "What are you thinking about?" James asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "About how sometimes the best things in life come in unexpected packages," Maya replied, leaning over to kiss him softly. Outside, the Atlanta skyline glowed orange and pink, a beautiful backdrop to their growing love story. 1 year into their relationship, James knew it was time. He had been planning this moment for weeks, with help from Maya's sisters, Tasha and Keisha, who had become his trusted allies. The Sweet Bean Coffee Shop, where they first met, would be the perfect place to ask Maya to be his wife. The owner, Mrs. Chen, was more than happy to help. She closed the shop early that rainy evening, just like the day they first met. James arrived an hour before Maya, setting everything up with Tasha's help. They scattered rose petals on the floor and hung tiny lights from the ceiling, making the coffee shop glow like a starlit sky. Maya had no idea what was waiting for her. She thought she was just meeting James for their usual Thursday coffee date after her hospital shift. When she pushed open the door, the tiny bell jingling above her head, she stopped in her tracks. The entire coffee shop was transformed. Soft jazz music played in the background, the same song that had been playing the day they met. James waited at their usual table, looking handsome in a dark suit, his wheelchair decorated with twinkling lights. "James?" Maya's voice trembled as she walked toward him. "What's all this?" "Maya Thompson," James began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "1 year ago, you walked into this coffee shop and changed my life forever. You saw past my wheelchair and looked straight into my heart." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Maya's hands flew to her mouth as tears began forming in her eyes. Every day with you has been an adventure. You've shown me that love knows no boundaries, that together we can face any challenge. You've made me a better man, a stronger person, and my best friend. James opened the box, revealing a beautiful sapphire ring, Maya's favorite stone. Will you make me the happiest man in Atlanta? Will you marry me? Maya couldn't speak for a moment. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she nodded vigorously. Yes, she finally managed to say. Yes, 1,000 times yes. As James slipped the ring onto her finger, cheers erupted from the back of the coffee shop. Maya turned to see both their families emerging from their hiding spots. Her mother Gloria, her sisters, James's father Robert, and his siblings Sarah and Michael. Gloria was the first to embrace Maya, tears in her eyes. I was wrong about him, baby, she whispered. That man loves you with his whole heart. The celebration lasted well into the night. Mrs. Chen served everyone coffee and pastries, while James's father Robert shared embarrassing stories about James's childhood. The two families, once uncertain about each other, now laughed and talked like old friends. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, Maya and James found a quiet moment alone. They sat by the window where they'd shared their first conversation, watching the rain fall outside. Are you ready for this journey? James asked, a hint of vulnerability in his voice. It won't always be easy. People will still stare, still judge. Maya took his hand, her new ring catching the light. I've never been more ready for anything in my life. Let them stare. Let them see what real love looks like. James pulled her close for a kiss, both of them smiling through happy tears. Outside, the rain had stopped, and a beautiful rainbow appeared in the sky, a perfect symbol of their love bridging all differences. As their families watched the tender moment, Gloria leaned over to Robert and whispered, "Those two are going to change the world, aren't they?" Robert nodded, watching his son beam with happiness. They already have, one heart at a time. Little did any of them know that this beautiful engagement was just the beginning. The biggest surprise of their lives was still waiting around the corner, hidden in the melody of an old song that would soon change everything. The morning of their wedding dawned bright and clear. Maya sat in front of the mirror at her mother's house as Gloria carefully pinned white flowers into her daughter's curls. The wedding dress, elegant and simple, sparkled in the morning light. In just a few hours, she would become Mrs. Wilson. Something's on your mind, baby, Gloria said, noticing Maya's thoughtful expression in the mirror. James has been so secretive lately, Mama. He keeps disappearing for hours, saying he's working on a surprise for the wedding. I'm worried he's pushing himself too hard. Gloria smiled knowingly. She was one of the few people who knew about James's surprise, but she had promised to keep it secret. Trust your man, baby. He knows what he's doing. At the church, guests filled the pews, a beautiful mix of both families and friends. The decorations blended both their cultures, with African prints and patterns alongside traditional white flowers. James waited at the altar in his wheelchair, looking dashing in his tuxedo, his best man Michael standing beside him. The music started, and Maya began her walk down the aisle on her uncle's arm. When James saw her, tears immediately filled his eyes. She was the most beautiful sight he had ever seen. Their eyes locked, and in that moment, nothing else existed but them. The ceremony was deeply personal. They had written their own vows, making promises not just of love, but of understanding, patience, and unwavering support. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in cheers and applause. But it was during the reception that the real surprise came. As the time for their first dance approached, James wheeled away from their table, saying he needed a moment. Maya watched, confused, as Michael and Robert followed him out of the room. 10 minutes later, the DJ announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the couple's first dance." Maya stood up, expecting to dance next to James' wheelchair as they had planned. But when she turned toward the dance floor, her hands flew to her mouth in shock. James was standing at the edge of the dance floor, supported by two sleek, black leg braces and a walker. "James," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Surprise, my love," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been practicing for months with these new adaptive braces. I wanted to hold you properly for our first dance." The room was silent as Maya walked to them. James carefully let go of the walker and with trembling arms pulled her close. The music began. At Last by Etta James, and they sway together, James's braces allowing him to move gently with the music. I can't believe you did this, Maya whispered against his chest. I'd do anything for you, James replied, holding her tighter. But don't worry, I'm not giving up my wheelchair. This is just for special moments like this. Their guests watched in awe as the couple shared their dance, many wiping away tears. Gloria and Robert stood together, watching their children with pride. Even the wedding photographers had to take breaks to wipe their eyes. As the song ended, James was visibly tired but beaming with joy. Maya helped him back to his wheelchair, kissing him tenderly as he sat down. The room burst into applause, celebrating not just their love, but their determination to overcome any obstacle together. Later that evening, as the reception continued around them, Maya and James shared a quiet moment on the venue's balcony. The Atlanta skyline glittered before them like a sea of stars. Mrs. Wilson, James said, taking her hand. Are you happy? Maya looked at her husband, her heart full of love. More than I ever thought possible, but how do you keep surprising me like this? James smiled mysteriously. Oh, my love, this is just the beginning. Life with me will never be boring, I promise you that. Little did Maya know just how true those words would prove to be. The biggest surprise of all was still waiting to be discovered, hidden in the depths of their new home together. 3 months into their marriage, Maya and James settled into a comfortable routine in their cozy apartment near downtown Atlanta. Maya continued her work at the hospital, while James worked from home, developing websites for his growing list of clients. Their life together was everything they had dreamed of. There was still more to discover about each other. One sunny Saturday morning, while James was at his physical therapy session, Maya decided to organize their home office. As she sorted through old papers and folders, she noticed something unusual behind the filing cabinet. A dusty black case. Curious, Maya pulled it out and opened it carefully. Inside was a beautiful violin, well preserved despite its apparent age. The rich wood gleamed even under the dust, and Maya could tell it was an expensive instrument. She had never seen James play any musical instrument, nor had he ever mentioned being a musician. When James returned home, he found Maya sitting on the office floor, the violin case open beside her, along with several sheets of music she had discovered in a nearby drawer. I see you found Benjamin, James said quietly, wheeling into the room. Benjamin? Maya asked, surprised by the personal name for the instrument. James moved closer, gently lifting the violin from its case. Named after Benjamin Britten, my favorite composer. This violin was my life before the accident. I was on track to become a professional violinist. Maya watched as James's fingers traced the curves of the instrument with obvious love and familiarity. Why didn't you ever tell me? It was too painful, he admitted. I was preparing for my biggest performance yet when the drunk driver hit my car. After the accident, the doctors said I would never have the same fine motor control in my fingers. I couldn't bear to try and fail, so I packed everything away and found a new path in web development. Maya moved to sit beside her husband, taking his hand. But your hands are so skilled on the keyboard now. Have you ever tried playing again? James shook his head. The violin requires a different kind of precision. Plus, the proper posture for playing. It's complicated with the wheelchair. Will you try? Maya asked softly. For me. James looked at his wife's encouraging face, seeing nothing but love and support in her eyes. After a long moment, he carefully positioned the violin under his chin, adjusting his wheelchair to find the right angle. The first few notes were shaky, uncertain, but as James continued, muscle memory began to take over. He played a simple melody, one he had learned as a child. Though not perfect, the music filled their apartment with a haunting beauty. When he finished, James's hands were trembling, and tears glistened in his eyes. Maya wrapped her arms around him, her own eyes wet with tears. That was beautiful, she whispered. You still have the gift, James. It's still there. It's not the same, he said, but Maya could hear a note of hope in his voice that hadn't been there before. It doesn't have to be the same, she replied. It just has to be yours. Maybe we could find a teacher who specializes in adaptive techniques. Someone who could help you rediscover your music in a new way. James carefully placed the violin back in its case, But this time he didn't close it. Maybe, he said thoughtfully, there's something else you should know. He wheeled over to the drawer where Maya had found the sheet music and pulled out a thick folder. I didn't just play music, I composed it too. There's one piece in particular. I never got to perform it. I never even got to hear it played properly. Maya took the folder, opening it to find pages of handwritten music. The title page read Symphony of Love in James's elegant handwriting, dated just days before his accident. Little did Maya know, she was holding in her hands the key to their biggest adventure yet, a piece of music that would change their lives forever. A week after discovering the violin, Maya was cleaning their bedroom when she knocked over a box from James's old desk. As she picked up the scattered contents, a small black USB drive caught her attention. Unlike the other items, this one seemed deliberately hidden in an envelope marked Symphony Final. Maya sat on their bed, turning the small drive over in her hands. James was at a client meeting, and curiosity got the better of her. She walked to their living room, plugged the drive into their laptop, and waited as it loaded. There was only one file on the drive, an audio recording dated 5 years ago, just 2 days before James's accident. Maya's heart began to race as she pressed play. The sound of an orchestra filled the room. The music started softly, like a gentle sunrise, then gradually built into something magical. Maya found herself frozen in place, tears streaming down her face as she listened. The piece was beautiful beyond words, full of hope, love, and triumph over adversity. In the middle of the recording, she clearly heard a solo violin rising above the orchestra. It was James playing, his talent shining through in every note. The music spoke of dreams, of reaching for the impossible, of finding love in unexpected places. It was as if he had somehow composed their love story years before they even met. Maya was so lost in the music that she didn't hear the apartment door open. She didn't notice James until he spoke. "I thought I'd lost that recording," he said quietly, wheeling into the room. Maya jumped, quickly wiping her tears. "James, I'm sorry. I found it by accident, and I—" "It's okay," he assured her, moving closer. "Maybe it's time you knew the whole story." James took a deep breath before continuing. "That piece, Symphony of Love, won the National Young Composers Competition. The prize included a full orchestra performance and recording session. We recorded it 2 days before my accident." "But it's incredible," Maya said. "Why didn't you ever claim the recognition?" James's eyes grew distant. "I was supposed to perform the violin solo at the official premiere. After the accident, I couldn't face it. I told them to give the prize to someone else. I never even listened to this recording until now." Maya knelt beside his wheelchair, taking his hands. "Do you know what I hear in this music? I hear us. I hear our love story, written before we even met. It's like you knew, somehow, that love would find you even in your darkest moment." James listened as the music continued playing, hearing it with new ears. "You're right," he said softly. "It's not just about loss anymore. It's about hope, about finding love when you least expect it." Suddenly, Maya sat up straighter. "James, what exactly did you win in that competition?" "First prize was the recording session, plus a substantial cash prize and publishing rights," he replied. "Why?" Maya quickly opened her laptop, searching for information about the competition. Her eyes widened as she read. "James, did you know that unclaimed prize money doesn't just disappear? According to their rules, it gets held in trust, accumulating interest until claimed." James stared at her, realization dawning on his face. "You mean—" "Your prize money has been gathering interest for 5 years," Maya said excitedly. "And according to this, as the rightful winner, you can still claim it." They spent the next hour making calls, verifying James's identity, and confirming their discovery. The original prize money had indeed been held in trust, growing substantially over the years. That evening, as they sat together listening to the recording again, James pulled Maya close. "You know what this means, right? We could do something meaningful with this money. Something that combines music and accessibility, the two things that have shaped our journey." Maya smiled, already seeing the possibilities. "I think I know exactly what you mean." Little did they know, their discovery was about to bring their dreams to life in ways they never imagined. The following week was a whirlwind of activity for Maya and James. After contacting the National Young Composers Competition Office, they learned the full extent of their discovery. The original prize money of $100,000 had been invested in a special trust fund, and after 5 years of compound interest, it had grown to over $350,000. "I can't believe this is real," James said, staring at the official email confirming the amount. They were sitting in their living room, surrounded by papers and planning documents. "All these years, I thought that part of my life was over." Maya squeezed his shoulder gently. Maybe it wasn't over. Maybe it was just waiting for the right moment, waiting for us. That evening, they invited both their families over for dinner to share the news. Gloria brought her famous sweet potato pie, while James's father Robert arrived with a bottle of champagne, sensing there was something special to celebrate. "We have an announcement," Maya said once everyone was settled in their living room. James held her hand as she continued. "We found a way to make our dream come true." They explained about finding the violin, discovering the recording, and learning about the prize money. Then James revealed their plan. They wanted to use the money to create an inclusive arts center, specifically designed to teach music to young people with disabilities. "The Wilson Thompson Center for Performing Arts," James announced, his voice full of emotion. "A place where disability doesn't mean inability, where everyone can find their voice through music." The family sat in stunned silence for a moment before erupting in joy. Gloria hugged Maya tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Baby, this is exactly what this city needs. You two are going to change so many lives." Robert walked over to James, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "Your mother would have been so proud," he said softly, referring to James's mom who had passed away when he was young. "She always said your music would touch people's hearts." Over the next few hours, they discussed their plans in detail. The center would have wheelchair-accessible practice rooms, adaptive instruments, and specialized teaching methods. They would hire instructors who understood both music and accessibility needs. "But that's not all," Maya added, pulling out some papers from her folder. She had been doing research all week. "There's a perfect building available just outside downtown. It used to be a community center, so it already has most of the accessibility features we need. And the best part? It has a small auditorium." James's eyes lit up at this last detail. "An auditorium where we can hold performances, showing the world what our students can do." Tasha, Maya's sister who worked in marketing, immediately jumped in with ideas for promoting the center. Keisha, who was studying education, offered to help develop programs for different age groups. Even Gloria and Robert started planning fundraising events to help sustain the center beyond the initial investment. As their families excitedly discussed possibilities, Maya noticed James had grown quiet. She wheeled him out onto their small balcony for a private moment. "What's on your mind, love?" she asked softly. James looked up at her, his eyes shining with tears. "I just realized something. All those years ago, when I wrote Symphony of Love, I thought I was writing about a love I hoped to find someday. But listening to it now, I realize I was writing about you, about us, about this moment right here." Maya knelt beside his wheelchair. "What do you mean?" "The symphony ends with a theme of triumph, of barriers breaking down, of love conquering all obstacles. That's our story, Maya. And now we get to help others write their own stories too." Inside, they could hear their families still chatting excitedly about the center. The Atlanta skyline twinkled before them, full of promise. But the biggest moment of all was yet to come, a performance that would bring everything full circle. 6 months later, the Wilson Thompson Center for Performing Arts was ready for its grand opening. The old community center had been transformed into a beautiful, fully accessible space filled with music and hope. Colorful murals decorated the walls, depicting musicians of all abilities playing together in harmony. The morning of the opening ceremony, Maya helped James dress in a sleek black suit. His violin, Benjamin, lay in its case nearby, polished and ready. After months of practice with an adaptive music instructor, James had regained much of his former skill, though in a different way than before. "Are you nervous?" Maya asked, straightening his tie. "Terrified," James admitted with a small smile. "I haven't performed in public since before the accident, but having you beside me makes everything possible." The auditorium was packed. Local news stations had picked up their story, and the opening had attracted attention from disability rights advocates across the country. In the front row sat their families, along with Mrs. Chen from the coffee shop and some of Maya's colleagues from the hospital. Mayor Johnson stood at the podium, praising their initiative. Today, she announced, Atlanta becomes a more inclusive city thanks to the vision of James and Maya Wilson. Their love story reminds us that music, like love, knows no boundaries. Maya then took the stage, her red dress matching the roses decorating the auditorium. When I first met James, she began, I thought I was just getting coffee. Instead, I found my soulmate, my purpose, and a dream bigger than anything I could have imagined. She continued, her voice strong and clear. This center isn't just about music, it's about breaking down barriers. It's about showing the world that disability doesn't define ability. Every person who walks or rolls through these doors will find acceptance, opportunity, and the chance to let their talent shine. The audience applauded as James wheeled onto the stage. The adaptive music stand they had designed together was ready, allowing him to hold his violin comfortably from his wheelchair. The orchestra, made up of both able-bodied and disabled musicians, waited behind him. James lifted his violin, and a hush fell over the crowd. Then, for the first time in 5 years, he began to play Symphony of Love in public. The music soared through the auditorium, telling their story in a way words never could. The orchestra joined in, building the piece to its triumphant climax. In the audience, Gloria and Robert held hands, tears streaming down their faces. They watched their children create magic together. James playing his heart out while Maya conducted the orchestra, something she had secretly learned over the past months as a surprise for James. When the final note faded away, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the audience erupted in a standing ovation that seemed to shake the building. James and Maya embraced on stage, both crying happy tears as camera flashes captured the moment. Later that evening, after the ceremonies were over and the last guests had left, Maya and James sat alone in their new auditorium. The building was quiet now, but filled with the promise of future music. Do you remember what you said to me the day we got married? Maya asked, perching on the edge of the stage beside James's wheelchair. You promised life with you would never be boring. James laughed, taking her hand. I'd say we definitely kept that promise. And this is just the beginning, Maya said, gesturing around them. Think of all the lives we'll touch, all the barriers we'll break, all the music we'll make together. James pulled her close for a kiss. You know what the best part is? That song I wrote all those years ago. It wasn't the end of my story like I thought. It was just the beginning. Our beginning. As they sat together in their new home away from home, the evening light streaming through the stained glass windows cast rainbow colors across the stage. Outside, a sign lit up in the growing dusk. Wilson Thompson Center for Performing Arts, where music has no limits. Their love story had become more than just their own. It had become a symphony of hope for others, proving that with love, determination, and a little bit of music, anything is possible.